Early morning, December 13th, 1943. 64 enemy warplanes emerged from the haze over Assam, India, and Second Lieutenant Philip Adair was the only American in the sky to stop them. The 23-year-old pilot banked his Curtiss P-40N Warhawk into a climbing turn, scanning the hostile formation stretching 3 miles to the east. Every aircraft in that armada was heading straight for Dinjan Airfield, his base. Adair had logged 43 combat sorties with the 89th Fighter Squadron, escorting Hump airlift transports across the Himalayas. This morning, though, when the enemy appeared, he flew alone. Over the past 2 months, Japanese strikes against Allied fields across northeast India had obliterated 47 cargo planes on the tarmac and claimed 112 lives. His Warhawk, christened Lulu Bell and bearing the number 44, mounted 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, enough firepower for roughly 12 seconds of continuous shooting. The attacking force arrayed itself in brutal efficiency. 24 Mitsubishi Ki, 21 Sally bombers, wrapped in protective layers by around 40 Nakajima Ki, 43 Oscar fighters stacked above and below the bomber stream. Intelligence briefings had shown that similar-scale raids in Burma scored 90% direct hits on undefended installations. Beneath Adair's wings, Dinjan sheltered 14 C-47 cargo aircraft packed with essential materiel bound for Chiang Kai-shek's armies in China, a field hospital caring for 63 wounded soldiers, and fuel reserves adequate to sustain Hump operations for 11 more days. Should those bombers penetrate unopposed, the destruction would cripple Allied supply lines over the Himalayas for weeks. The closest friendly fighters sat grounded at Jorhat, 38 minutes away at top speed. Adair's eyes dropped to his fuel gauge. Full internal tanks holding 180 gallons, roughly 90 minutes of flight at combat power. The Japanese formation cruised 3,000 feet below, tracking toward the airfield at 240 miles per hour. Every tactical manual stated clearly, fighter pilots outnumbered more than 5 to 1 should hold position and await reinforcements. Adair faced 64 to 1 odds. 2 options lay before him. He could radio for assistance and shadow the formation until support arrived, by which time bombs would be cratering the runway. Or he could engage immediately, alone, and attempt to wreck their bombing run before they reached release altitude. Adair rammed the throttle forward. His Allison V1710 engine responded instantly, manifold pressure surging past 54 inches. The P-40 leaped to 320 miles per hour as he maneuvered into position 4,000 feet above the bomber formation, approaching from the south with the sun at his back. The Oscars hadn't detected him yet. Their focus remained locked ahead on the target. He held one tactical advantage: surprise. Japanese pilots anticipated interceptors rising near the target zone, not 20 miles out. Adair calculated his attack vector. Strike the lead bomber element first, bypass the fighters initially, shatter their bombing precision, scatter them, compel them to abandon the attack run. Could one P-40 disrupt 64 Japanese aircraft? Hit like and subscribe to see how this unfolds, and let's get back to Adair. The lead Sally bomber group maintained tight formation. 6 aircraft arranged in 2 3-plane Vs. Adair rolled inverted, hauled the nose down, and plunged at the bombers from their 7 o'clock high position. Airspeed climbed rapidly, 360 miles per hour, 380. The P-40's Allison screamed at maximum power. Distance collapsed swiftly. The bomber crews remained oblivious. At 800 yards, Adair squeezed the trigger. His 6.50 calibers roared to life, tracers arcing toward the lead Sally. Rounds stitched up the bomber's left wing. Fabric shredded, metal sparked. The port engine detonated in an orange fireball. Black smoke gushed from the cowling. The formation disintegrated. Bombers broke left and right, their tight V dissolving into chaos. Adair yanked back hard. 7Gs crushed him into his seat and snapped the stick right. 40 Oscar fighters were plunging toward him. The Nakajima Ki, 43 Oscar, ranked among the Pacific Theater's most agile fighters. Its Nakajima Ha-115 engine produced 1,150 horsepower, propelling it to 329 miles per hour at 13,000 feet, with turning circles tighter than any American fighter. The Oscar's butterfly combat flaps enabled rapid speed reduction in turns without stalling. Japanese pilots exploited this ruthlessly. Over the preceding 6 months, Oscars had downed 63 Allied fighters above Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N held straight-line speed superiority, but couldn't match the Oscar's turn performance. The Warhawk's Allison V 1710-81 generated 1,240 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, delivering maximum velocity of 378 miles per hour below 12,000 feet. Yet in sustained turning engagements, the heavier American fighter bled energy faster than the lightweight Japanese machine. Standard P-40 doctrine against Oscars was straightforward. Never dogfight them. Employ speed. Strike and break away. Extend. Reset. Adair couldn't extend away. Fleeing would allow the bombers to regroup and complete their assault on Dinjan. He had to maintain pressure on the formation. Keep them scattered. Keep them rattled. Even if it meant dueling 40 Oscars solo. The first 4 Oscars approached in a loose finger 4 formation from his 10 o'clock high. Adair snapped left, pitched the nose up, and fired a 2-second burst at the lead fighter. His .50 caliber rounds sailed high. The Oscar broke right, wingman following. Adair reversed, diving to preserve speed. 2 more Oscars dove from above. He spotted them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn, fired again. No hits. His ammunition counter displayed 800 rounds remaining across all 6 guns. Roughly 6 more attacks at his current firing rate. Behind the fighter screen, the Sally bombers were attempting to reorganize. 3 6-plane groups were reforming into attack formations. If they re-established their bombing Vs, they'd press the attack. Adair had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached their release point over Dinjan. He rolled out, slammed the throttle to the firewall, and dove toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars pursued him down. The P-40 accelerated to 405 miles per hour in the dive. The Oscars couldn't match that velocity. Adair opened the gap, leveled at bomber altitude, and aligned on the right-hand Sally formation. Range: 300 yards. He fired. Tracers converged on the lead bomber's right engine. The Mitsubishi Ha-101 radial exploded in a fireball. The bomber rolled right, trailing fire and wreckage. Its wingman broke formation to evade collision. Adair kicked rudder, skidded left, fired at another Sally. His rounds punched through the bomber's thin fuselage skin. The Ki-21 carried no armor protection for crew, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Designed in 1936, it was obsolete by 1943 standards, yet it still hauled 2,250 pounds of bombs, sufficient to annihilate everything on Dinjan airfield. The Oscar fighters were closing again, 12 this time. Adair's fuel gauge read 162 gallons remaining. His ammunition counter showed 650 rounds. The bombers were 19 miles from Dinjan, perhaps 4 minutes from bomb release range. Then his engine began overheating. The Allison V 1710-81 was liquid-cooled. Coolant circulated through passages in cylinder heads and block, absorbing combustion heat, then flowed through a radiator mounted beneath the fuselage. At combat power settings exceeding 50 inches of manifold pressure, the engine generated extreme temperatures. The cooling system was engineered to sustain such operation for approximately 20 minutes. Adair had been running at full power for 11 minutes. His coolant temperature gauge indicated 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal operating temperature was 210. At 250, the engine would begin failing. 3 choices confronted him: reduce power to cool the engine, abandon the attack and return to base, or continue fighting and risk engine failure over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 17 miles from Dinjan, still within bombing range, still dangerous. Adair kept the throttle forward. 2 Oscars came at him head-on. Closing speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. Both fighters opened fire at 500 yards. Adair saw their muzzle flashes, 7.7 millimeter tracers walking toward his nose. He fired back. His heavier .50 caliber rounds carried superior energy and reached farther. At 350 yards, his round struck the left Oscar's engine cowling. The lightweight fighter shuddered, broke left, trailing white coolant vapor. Its wingman followed. Adair rolled right and dove. His coolant temperature hit 240 degrees. The Sally bombers were 15 miles from target. 2 6-plane formations had reformed into bombing Vs. The third formation remained scattered. 3 bombers struggling to rejoin. Adair went for the lead formation again. 6 Oscars attempted to intercept. He dove past them at 390 miles per hour, too fast to pursue. At bomber altitude, he leveled and opened fire on the lead Sally. His first burst struck the bomber's right wing root. The wing structure failed catastrophically. The outer panel folded upward and tore free. The Sally rolled inverted and entered a spin. No parachutes emerged. The crew rode it down. The formation broke again. Bombers scattered in 3 directions. Their bombing accuracy was destroyed. Even if they released now, their ordnance would scatter across miles of jungle rather than concentrating on the airfield. Adair pulled up hard. His coolant temperature gauge indicated 248 degrees. The engine ran rough. He could feel vibration through the control stick. Detonation was initiating in the cylinders. Pre-ignition from excessive heat. Without power reduction soon, the engine would seize. 8 Oscars dove on him from above. He spotted them late, rolled left. Too slow. 7.7 millimeter rounds punched through his right wing. Fabric tore, metal buckled. 1 round severed his right aileron control rod. Aileron response went mushy. He needed increased right stick pressure to maintain level flight. Another burst walked up his fuselage. Rounds sparked off his engine cowling. 1 penetrated the coolant reservoir behind the firewall. Green coolant sprayed across his windscreen. The engine temperature gauge climbed past 260 degrees. Steam erupted from cowling seams. His oil pressure dropped. The Allison was dying. Adair chopped the throttle. Engine RPM fell from 3,000 to 2,400. Insufficient power to maintain altitude. The P-40 began descending at 1,000 feet per minute, then 1,500. The Oscars circled above, waiting. Then his engine caught fire. Fire in liquid-cooled aircraft engines follows predictable sequences. First, burning coolant vaporizes and ignites. Flames spread forward along the engine cowling, drawn by airflow. If fire reaches fuel lines running along the engine's left side, the aircraft explodes. Adair had perhaps 30 seconds before that occurred. Standard procedure for engine fires mandated immediate shutdown and bailout. But his altitude was only 8,000 feet, descending rapidly, and he was 12 miles from friendly territory, over jungle, where Japanese patrols operated. He kept the engine running. The Allison's fuel mixture could be leaned manually. Adair pulled the mixture control back to idle cutoff for 3 seconds, starving the engine of fuel. Fire intensity decreased. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine coughed, caught, continued running. Rough. Power output had dropped to approximately 60%. Insufficient to climb. Barely adequate to maintain level flight. He was committed. Fly home on a burning, damaged engine, or abandon the aircraft over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 13 miles from Dinjan, still close enough to reverse course and attack, but their formations had disintegrated. Individual bombers were heading southeast toward Burma. The raid was broken. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Nguli, 43 miles distant, approximately 15 minutes if the engine kept running. 6 Oscars followed. At 7,000 feet, his engine oil pressure dropped to 0. The Allison depended on oil pressure to lubricate connecting rods, crankshaft, and camshaft. Without oil pressure, metal ground against metal. Friction generated heat. Heat caused expansion. Components seized. Adair felt engine vibration increase. The propeller began windmilling unevenly. Power output fell further. Airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour. The P-40's stall speed was 120. He was losing the margin between controlled flight and falling. Behind him, the Oscars closed to 400 yards. They didn't fire, just watched, waiting for complete engine failure, waiting for him to bail out or crash. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot gestured downward. Land the aircraft. Surrender. Become a prisoner. Adair ignored him. At 6,000 feet, smoke began filling his cockpit, not from the engine fire, but from electrical wiring behind the instrument panel. Rounds that had hit his fuselage had severed control cables and damaged the electrical system. Smoke burned his eyes and throat. He slid the canopy open. Wind blast cleared some smoke, but the slipstream made breathing difficult. Airspeed fell to 160 miles per hour. The Oscars backed off. They wouldn't waste ammunition. The American pilot was already dead. His aircraft crippled, engine dying. He would crash in the jungle. They circled higher, watching him descend. At 4,000 feet, Adair's right aileron control cable snapped. The aileron flopped to full deflection. The P-40 rolled right, and the nose dropped into a dive. He hauled back on the control stick with both hands. Nothing. The elevator cables were damaged. He had no pitch control. The nose stayed down. Airspeed increased. 200 miles per hour. 220. 250. The jungle rushed up. Altitude, 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. He was going to crash. Then he had an idea. The P-40's damaged aileron was forcing the right wing down. The broken elevator cables left the horizontal stabilizer nose down. Gravity and aerodynamic forces were pulling the aircraft into an uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work bidirectionally. If Adair rolled the aircraft inverted, the damaged aileron would force the right wing up instead of down. The elevator stuck nose down would push the tail down, lifting the nose up. Flying upside down would reverse the control inputs. The damage killing him right side up might save him inverted. At 1,800 feet above the jungle, Adair rolled the P-40 completely inverted. -1 G pressed him against his shoulder straps. Blood rushed to his head. His vision turned red around the edges. The fuel system, designed for positive G loads, struggled to feed fuel inverted. The Allison coughed, sputtered, nearly quit, then caught again, running rough, but producing power. The nose came up. Descent slowed. At 1,200 feet, the P-40 leveled out, flying upside down at 140 miles per hour. Adair held the inverted attitude for 40 seconds. Airspeed increased to 160. He was climbing slowly, 50 feet per minute, but climbing. Then fuel starvation returned. The engine began cutting out. He rolled right side up. The damaged controls immediately pushed the nose down. The P-40 descended again, 600 feet per minute. Adair waited until he lost 300 feet, then rolled inverted again. The nose came up. He climbed 200 feet before fuel starvation forced him upright. The pattern repeated, upside down to climb, right side up to feed fuel properly. Flip, climb, flip, descend, flip, climb. The 6 Oscars circling above watched this impossible display. An American P-40 with a burning engine and damaged controls, flying alternately inverted and upright, refusing to crash, clawing for altitude with the determination of a wounded animal refusing to die. One Oscar dove to investigate. Adair saw him coming, rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly at the Japanese fighter. The Oscar broke away. The American pilot was either insane or desperate. Either way, the Oscars decided not to engage. They turned east toward Burma. Adair continued his rolling climb toward Nguli. His fuel gauge showed 83 gallons. His oil pressure gauge showed 0. The needle pegged at 0 for 9 minutes. The engine should have seized by now. Connecting rods should have welded to the crankshaft. The fact it still ran defied mechanical logic. The Allison was operating on momentum, friction, and whatever microscopic oil film remained on internal components. His altitude reached 3,000 feet, then 4,000. Nguli Base lay 21 miles southwest, approximately 11 minutes at current speed. His coolant temperature gauge no longer registered. The needle had melted off. Smoke still poured from the cowling, but flames had subsided. Either the fire had consumed available fuel, or coolant loss had somehow starved it. At 5,000 feet, Adair spotted Nguli Airfield ahead. The runway, the tower, the revetments, safety. But he faced a new problem. His landing gear was hydraulic. The hydraulic system ran on engine power. His engine produced minimal power and might quit completely any second. If he lowered the gear and the engine died, he'd crash short of the runway gear down. If he kept gear up and attempted a belly landing, impact might rupture remaining fuel tanks and the aircraft would burn. He needed gear down and locked before engine failure. He reached for the gear lever. His right hand shook, not from fear, but from carbon monoxide poisoning. Cockpit smoke had been accumulating for 14 minutes. He pulled the gear lever down. Nothing happened. The P-40's hydraulic system operated at 1,000 pounds per square inch. Hydraulic fluid, pressurized by an engine-driven pump, flowed through steel lines to actuators extending and retracting landing gear. With minimal engine power, the hydraulic pump wasn't generating sufficient pressure. The gear remained locked up. The P-40 had a backup, a manual hand pump mounted on the cockpit's left side. 28 strokes would manually pressurize the hydraulic system enough to lower gear. Adair grabbed the pump handle with his left hand, keeping his right on the control stick. He pumped. 1, 2, 3, nothing. The gear stayed up. The hand pump required both hands for effective operation, but releasing the stick meant losing aircraft control. Damaged ailerons and elevator would immediately push the nose down. He reached behind his seat, pulled his lap belt loose, wrapped it around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, pulled tight. The makeshift rig held the stick in approximate neutral. Not perfect control, but enough to keep the aircraft flying straight. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and pumped hard. 5 strokes, 10, 15. At stroke 23, he felt resistance, hydraulic pressure building. At stroke 28, he heard a thunk beneath the cockpit. The left main gear extended and locked. The right main gear followed 3 seconds later. The P-40 was now draggy. Gear down increased drag significantly. Airspeed fell from 160 miles per hour to 135, still above stall, but barely. The engine produced perhaps 40% power now, barely sufficient to maintain altitude with gear extended. Nagali runway was 7 miles ahead. 3 minutes. His vision tunneled. Gray edges closed from the periphery. Carbon monoxide poisoning was affecting brain function. He shook his head, focused on the runway. 6 miles. His engine temperature gauge, the one still functioning, showed 310 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond redline. Metal components inside the engine were expanding from heat. Tolerances were closing. Any second, a piston would seize, a valve stick, or a connecting rod snap. 5 miles. Tower operators at Naguli saw him coming. A P-40 trailing smoke, flying erratically, gear down. They assumed a normal approach. Lower flaps, reduce speed, touch down main wheels first. Standard landing procedure. But Adair's flaps were hydraulic too. With minimal engine power, he couldn't pump sufficient hydraulic pressure for both gear and flaps. Gear was down. Flaps stayed up. Landing without flaps meant higher landing speed, 120 miles per hour instead of 90. That meant longer landing roll. Nagali's runway measured 4,000 feet. A flapless landing in a damaged aircraft required at least 3,000 feet. Doable if he maintained airspeed, if the engine kept running, if he touched down smoothly. 2 miles from the runway, his engine quit. The propeller windmilled to a stop. No power, no thrust. The P-40 became a glider, a very poor glider. The Warhawk's glide ratio was approximately 8-to-1. From 2,000 feet altitude, he could glide roughly 3 miles. The runway was 2 miles away. Theoretically possible, but his damaged aircraft had extra drag from battle damage, bullet holes in wings, and fuselage disrupting airflow. His actual glide ratio was worse than normal, perhaps 6-to-1. He wasn't going to make the runway. He was going to crash short in the jungle. After surviving 64 Japanese aircraft, after flying inverted for 11 minutes, after nursing a dying engine for 15 miles, he'd crashed 200 yards from safety because his engine quit at the worst possible moment. Then he remembered something from training, something his instructor mentioned about P-40 glide performance, something about flying inverted. In normal glide, an aircraft descends nose first, gravity pulling downward while wings generate lift. Inverted, aerodynamics reverse. Wing camber, designed to generate upward lift, when right side up, generates downward force inverted. However, at specific angles of attack, this reversal creates less drag than right side up flight. An inverted glide could theoretically extend range by reducing drag. The principle had been mentioned briefly during training. No instructor expected pilots to actually use it. Adair had nothing to lose. He rolled inverted at 1,800 feet, 1 mile from the runway. Blood rushed to his head. Vision greened. He held the inverted attitude, watching jungle pass beneath or above. Perspective became disorienting. Airspeed held steady at 125 miles per hour. Descent rate, 500 feet per minute, better than the 700 feet per minute he'd experienced right side up. Tower operators at Naguli saw an inverted P-40 approaching, landing gear extended. Gear down while inverted was aerodynamically wrong, structurally stressful. Gear doors designed to handle air loads from below were now subjected to loads from above. but the gear held. The P-40 continued its inverted approach. On the ground, Crew Chief Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez watched through binoculars. He saw the inverted aircraft, gear extended, smoke trailing. His first thought, a Japanese pilot had stolen a P-40 and was attempting to strafe the field. Martinez ran toward the nearest .50 caliber machine gun position. 3 ground crew followed. They reached the emplacement and began traversing the weapon toward the approaching aircraft. Adair was at 400 feet altitude, half a mile from the runway threshold, still inverted. His vision was fading. Gray tunnels closed in. Carbon monoxide and negative G-forces were shutting down his brain. He had perhaps 20 seconds of consciousness remaining. He needed to roll upright, align with the runway, and land. But rolling upright too soon would push the nose down, and he'd crash short. Rolling too late would overshoot the runway. At 200 feet altitude, 300 yards from threshold, Adair rolled right side up. The damaged aileron immediately pushed the right wing down. He countered with left stick, fighting the aircraft, forcing wings level. The nose wanted to drop. He pulled back on the stick. Broken elevator cables gave partial control. Not much, just enough. The P-40 descended toward the runway at a steep angle, nose high, wings wobbling. Martinez's gun crew tracked the aircraft. The P-40 was definitely damaged, smoke pouring from it. Might be friendly, might be enemy. In 3 seconds, the aircraft would cross the runway threshold. Martinez had to decide, shoot or hold fire. He held fire. Adair crossed threshold at 90 feet, descending rapidly. Too fast, too steep. The P-40 dropped the last 90 feet in 4 seconds. Main wheels hit concrete hard. 7G impact. Gear struts compressed fully. Tail wheel slammed down. Metal shrieked. The right main gear collapsed. The right wing dropped. Wingtip hit runway and dug in. The aircraft ground looped right, spinning 180 degrees, throwing sparks and concrete fragments. It skidded backward 200 feet and stopped. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment. Fire crews raced toward the aircraft. Adair sat motionless in the cockpit for 12 seconds. Then he released his shoulder straps, stood, and climbed onto the wing. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the wing root. Ground crew reached him and helped him down. Martinez arrived with the fire crew. They opened the cowling. The Allison engine was destroyed. Pistons seized, crankshaft warped, oil pan ruptured, coolant everywhere. Adair walked around the aircraft with Martinez. They counted damage: 16 bullet holes in fuselage, 7 in right wing, 4 in left. 1 round had severed the right aileron control cable completely. Another punctured the hydraulic reservoir. A third cut through 2 electrical bundles behind the instrument panel. The engine sustained catastrophic damage from overheating and oil starvation. Every cylinder showed scoring. 3 connecting rods welded to the crankshaft. The coolant system was destroyed. Lulu Bell would never fly again. But Philip Adair had saved Dinjan Airfield. Intelligence reports confirmed all 24 Sally bombers turned back without dropping ordnance. The Japanese formation scattered 15 miles short of target. 40 Oscar fighters escorted empty bombers back to Burma. 0 bombs hit Allied facilities. 0 casualties on the ground. 14 C-47 transports remained operational. The Hump airlift continued without interruption. 3 days after the mission, 10th Air Force Headquarters interviewed Adair about the engagement. He described the attack sequence, the inverted flying technique, the landing approach. Flight surgeons examined him. Carbon monoxide levels in his blood remained elevated 72 hours post-mission. They determined he'd been flying with severe poisoning for the final 11 minutes. That level of impairment should have rendered him unconscious. He'd somehow remained functional through will alone. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of U.S. Forces China-Burma-India Theater, presented Second Lieutenant Philip Adair with the Silver Star. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, engaged and disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft attacking Allied installations, continuing his attack despite severe aircraft damage and personal injury, thereby preventing destruction of critical supply facilities." Adair flew 95 more combat missions with the 81st Fighter Group. He achieved ace status with 5 confirmed kills. On his final mission in July 1944, he shot down 2 P-43 Oscars over northern Burma. He returned to the United States in September 1944, survived the war, and remained in the Air Force for 30 years. He retired as a full colonel in 1971. The 81st Fighter Group, the Burma Banshees, continued operations until August 1945. The unit destroyed 413 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 147 on the ground. They lost 63 pilots, killed or missing. Their death's head skull insignia became one of the most recognized markings in the China-Burma-India theater. The P-40 Warhawk never achieved the fame of the P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt. It was slower than both. It couldn't fight effectively above 15,000 feet. By 1943, it was considered obsolete. But in the hands of determined pilots like Philip Adair, the rugged Curtiss fighter proved what mattered most in combat wasn't the aircraft's specifications. It was the courage and skill of the pilot flying it. One pilot, one obsolete fighter, 64 enemy aircraft, December 13th, 1943. Philip Adair proved that impossible odds mean nothing when someone refuses to quit. His solution to damage controls, flying alternately inverted and upright for 11 minutes, defied every standard flying procedure. His inverted landing approach with gear extended had never been attempted before and was never repeated. That's the story of the Burma Banshees and the day one P-40 pilot disrupted an entire Japanese raid. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit that like button, subscribe for more forgotten heroes, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the CBI theater. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.